Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight you're not a warrior, a legend, or a name worth carving into stone. You're a helot, which is Sparta's charming way of saying you're less than nothing. You weren't conquered last week. Your ancestors were conquered centuries ago, and the punishment hasn't ended since. You were born in the dirt, into a caste of state-owned serfs designed specifically to make Spartan citizens look impressive by comparison. You farm their land, serve their food, raise their children, and sometimes die so their sons can practice stabbing something that screams. You are not a person. You are a function. And you'd better perform it quietly, because Sparta doesn't like it when its tools talk back. So before you're murdered during this year's government-sanctioned teenage kill spree, or beaten to death for the crime of looking a bit too tall, do me a favour. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from, and why exactly this is the bedtime content your brain chose tonight. If you'd like early access, ad-free audio of these episodes, or just want to support the show, there's a Patreon link below. But for now, lie back, get comfortable, let's begin. You are not born into the world so much as deposited into it like refuse. No fanfare, no ceremony, no midwife, unless one happened to be passing through and owed your mother a favour. Most likely, she gave birth crouched behind a rock in the fields she doesn't own, biting down on a leather strap to keep from screaming too loud. There are no blankets, no clean water, no prayers of thanks, just blood, mud, and the unremarkable fact that another helot has entered the world. A future tool, born into a system that does not require your consent, your comfort, or your survival. Merely your usefulness. Your parents have no legal names, not ones that matter. They might go by something, but to the Spartans, they're just those helots from the South Field. Your mother's name was never recorded, and your father's isn't spoken unless it's to blame someone for a broken tool or a failed crop. You'll inherit the same status. You belong to the state, not in the way soldiers do, with glory and oaths and armour, but in the way oxen do. Your body is spartiate property. Your future is a list of chores, and your best case scenario is that you die slowly enough to be replaced without fuss. Your infancy is not protected. There is no cradle, no lullaby, just a strip of cloth to swaddle your raw, bony limbs while your mother goes back to work within the hour. Maybe someone older watches you, but they're a child too, just slightly less breakable than you are. You're rocked not in arms, but in a basket hung near the fire, swaying in rhythm with a draught that smells like mildew and smoke. You do not learn language through storybooks or gentle instruction. You learn it from commands, grunts, and the occasional slap for not crawling fast enough out of someone's way. By the time you're old enough to stand, you already know what pain is. Not metaphorically, literally. You know what a whip feels like, even if you can't pronounce the word. You've had your feet burned on hot dirt, your fingers crushed under tools, your scalp tugged by accident and on purpose. You've seen other children disappear, carried off by illness, wild animals, or Spartan boys playing Cryptia out of season. You've been told not to ask where they went, and you didn't. You're learning. The other helots don't smile much. They're not cruel, just tired. Tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. Their backs are bent, not from age, but from decades of forced humility. You see them lower their eyes when Spartans pass. You learn to do the same. You don't understand why at first. Then you see what happens when someone forgets. A broken nose, a shattered hand, a hole in the ground that wasn't there yesterday. The Spartans don't need a reason. The reason is that you exist. That's already offense enough. You have no siblings, or you have too many. Either way, no one talks about it. Children come and go in helot huts like weather, sometimes plentiful, sometimes vanished without a trace. No one records births, no one tracks deaths. You share your straw bedding with lice, your food with rats, and your name with whoever was unlucky enough to be born around the same time. You'll be called boy, or you, or just whistled at. If you cry too much, you might get left outside for a night. If you cry louder, Someone might come back for you. No promises. You are not taught to dream. No one tells you bedtime stories about being anything other than obedient. There is no future for you beyond the fields, the stable, and the grave. The Spartans call you lazy, even though you work harder by the age of 5 than they will in a year. They call you cowardly, even though you walk through life unarmed, unprotected, and always one wrong look away from execution. They call you dirty, though they stole your land and gave you mud. You are everything they despise, Watiti, not because of who you are, but because you're there to remind them what they built their empire on. And yet, despite it all, you survive, not because you're brave, not because you're strong, but because surviving is what's expected of you. Dying would be inconvenient, your labour is counted, your breath is measured, your usefulness is calculated down to the minute. If you collapse, someone else will be punished for it. And if you die, someone younger will be beaten into replacing you. You are not irreplaceable. You are not mourned. You are just next. So you keep breathing. You learn when to speak and when to be silent. You learn how to take a blow and how to not flinch when it's coming. You learn to eat fast, walk fast, work fast, and never, ever think too hard about what it all means. Thinking is a citizen's privilege. Yours is to endure, and you will, until your body breaks or your spirit does, whichever comes first. Because you were never meant to live a life. You were only meant to fuel one. There is no such thing as childhood here, not in the way anyone outside Sparta might recognize. You don't get a gap between infancy and labour. No golden years of growing, playing, or wondering what you'll be when you grow up. You are what you are from the moment you can walk. A resource, a miniature beast of burden, with no horns, no hooves, and no rights. You are a child only in the sense that your bones still creak when you stand too fast and you can't yet lift a full water jar without it sloshing all over your legs. Your mornings begin before the sun does. You wake up in a room that smells like mould and sweat, lying shoulder to shoulder with siblings or cousins or maybe just other Helot children who drifted in and never left. There's no privacy and there's definitely no affection. If someone nudges you awake, it's not to greet you. It's to make room or remind you that the day has already started without you. The adults are long gone, off to tend to the Spartan fields or scrub the floors of someone else's home. You're expected to follow suit. The work is constant and somehow always pointless. You carry firewood across 1/2 mile of thorns with bare feet, and if you bleed, you keep going. You're too small to be helpful and too old to be idle, which means you're the perfect candidate for the in-between jobs. Ones that are miserable enough to hurt, but menial enough to be considered good for you. You herd goats that don't listen. You haul buckets you can barely lift. You clear stones from fields you'll never harvest. No one thanks you. No one teaches you how. You're simply expected to figure it out before someone notices you haven't. There's no school, no letters, no numbers, just commands and punishments. The Spartans don't care if you can read. They care if you can shut up, work fast, and not die in the middle of a chore. The most education you get is learning how not to draw attention to yourself, how to walk with your eyes lowered, how to accept orders without hesitation, how to take a strike across the face without making a sound. These are survival skills, not moral lessons. No one's trying to make you better. They're trying to make you tolerable. You don't play, you can't afford to. You've seen what happens when Helot children get too loud, too joyful, too free. It draws eyes, and eyes bring consequences. If a Spartan hears laughter coming from a Helot hut, they assume someone's gotten too comfortable, and they fix that. With fists, with kicks, with the back of a spear shaft. If they're feeling generous, they'll simply humiliate you in front of your family. If they're not, you won't make it back through the door. Either way, you learn to keep your happiness quiet, or better yet, get rid of it altogether. Crying doesn't help. If you cry, you're weak. If you don't cry, you're insolent. It's a trap. and you fall into it constantly. You're whipped for falling behind, scolded for making noise, and backhanded for hesitating. And then, when you do everything right, when you're quiet and quick and careful, you might still be slapped across the jaw because someone else made a mistake, and you're simply the nearest Helot child available. You begin to understand that fairness is not a principle here. It's a luxury reserved for people who matter. Illness comes quickly and never fully leaves. Your body is always fighting something, a cough, a rash, the chill that sinks into your ribs and never quite thaws. Your clothes are thin, your stomach is rarely full, and your feet are a mess of scabs and calluses. Parasites are a given. So is infection. You drink water from muddy streams, eat food with your fingers, and sleep in piles of fabric that haven't been washed since they were stolen from a dead neighbour. You don't get medicine. You get told to walk it off, even if your leg is swollen twice its size and smells like rot. But what you notice most, what you carry with you, is the cold. Not the kind that sharpens the air and makes your teeth chatter, but the kind that burrows deep. It seeps through your skin and takes up residence behind your ribs, just beneath your hunger. You're always cold, not because the weather is cruel, but because the world is. The hearth isn't for you. The warmth is for Spartans, for people with cloaks and sandals and roofs that don't leak. You get smoke, you get wind, you get cold, and then you get used to it. By the time you're old enough to understand what the word child is supposed to mean, it's already too late. You don't remember ever feeling safe. You don't remember what it's like to be lifted, held, soothed. Those aren't memories you're allowed to have. You weren't raised, you were tolerated, and only just. Your survival wasn't nurtured, it was observed, like watching to see which weeds managed to sprout through the stone. You didn't have a childhood, you had an apprenticeship in pain. And you're only just getting started. You learn early that food isn't something you're given. It's something you scavenge, steal, or fight rats for. If you're fortunate, someone tosses you a lump of grain that isn't too wet with mildew. If you're not, you chew on boiled grass and pretend it's soup. Your meals aren't scheduled. They're sporadic, unpredictable, and always disappointing. No one feeds helots. You feed yourself, in the same way stray dogs do. Quietly, quickly, and always while watching your back. The fields you work every day grow wheat, olives and barley, but those aren't for you. They belong to Sparta, which is to say, to people who'd rather die than share. You harvest grain that will never touch your lips. You press olives you aren't allowed to taste. You carry baskets of figs up and down hills until your arms shake, only to watch them disappear into the storerooms of men who wouldn't piss on you if you were on fire. You don't get paid, you don't even get scraps. You're expected to survive on whatever the land doesn't notice is missing. So you get creative. You chew bitter greens that grow between fence posts. You try not to gag on stringy wild onions. If you're lucky enough to catch a rat, you cook it over a fire made from dung and dry twigs and hope the meat doesn't smell too strongly of whatever it died from. Bugs are fair game. So is mud, when mixed with crushed bark and desperation. Hunger becomes your permanent houseguest, louder than your thoughts, sharper than your bones, and entirely uninterested in fairness. Sometimes, if the harvest is bad or the overseer is in a foul mood, you don't eat at all. Days blur together in a haze of dizziness. Your stomach chewing itself raw while you dig trenches or carry firewood. Your body gets the message. Growth is cancelled. Your limbs stay thin, your belly distends, your hair falls out in clumps. You lose teeth before you've ever used them properly. Your bones stay visible, even when you're full, which almost never happens. You don't grow stronger, you just grow stringier. Stealing food is a gamble you eventually take, not because you're bold, but because there's nothing left to lose. A crust of bread left unattended, a handful of grain dropped in the dirt, a half-rotten apple hidden in your tunic. You learn to chew quietly, breathe shallowly, and deny everything if questioned. Getting caught might mean a beating. It might mean mutilation. It might mean death. The punishment depends on who catches you and how bored they are, but starving is its own punishment, one that never ends. So eventually, you risk it anyway. The real cruelty is that sometimes stealing works. You fill your belly for a night, you fall asleep without your ribs aching, but then you wake to find someone else collapsed. A younger child, an older sibling, someone who went hungry so you wouldn't. They didn't know you were stealing. But the food had to come from somewhere, and now it hasn't come for them. Your guilt is irrelevant. They're still dead. You still have to get up and work. Water isn't much better. The clean stuff is reserved for Spartans, fetched from wells and springs guarded like temples. You drink runoff, river muck, rain caught in broken jars. Some days, you don't drink at all just to avoid the gut rot that comes from swamp water thick with insects and filth. You know people who've died of thirst surrounded by water. Not because it wasn't there, but because it wasn't safe. Survival becomes a daily calculation. How much poison your body can tolerate before it gives up. Your stool turns pale, your urine darkens, your breath starts to stink of acetone. These are signs of starvation, though you don't know the word. You just know that your body feels hollow, that your muscles cramp when you bend over, and that standing up too fast makes the world turn black for a moment. Sometimes, you forget to be hungry. That's the most dangerous part. Hunger is a warning. Its absence means you're running on fumes, and yet somehow you keep going. Not because the food gets better, but because your expectations shrink to fit your misery. You start to think mold is flavour. That bitterness is normal. That pain after eating is just part of the experience. You convince yourself that fullness is a myth, something Spartans invented to make you feel weak. You stop dreaming about meals. You start dreaming about less hunger. That feels more realistic. You are not at the top of the food chain. You're not even on it. You exist somewhere below the goats and just above the worms. The Spartans eat like kings. On food you grew no less. The animals they keep are healthier than you are. And when your body finally gives out, when your legs won't carry you and your belly won't settle, the soil you helped till will take you in, quietly, without ceremony, like garbage returning to the compost heap. And someone else will take your place in the line, eyeing the fields, weighing the risk of theft against the certainty of hunger. Because the food is never for you. It never was. You are a farmer in name, but that word implies ownership, or at least dignity. You have neither. You don't farm your land. You don't harvest your crops. You don't get to choose what grows when it's reaped, or who eats it. You just exist in the middle of it all. Skin cracked from sun and wind, hands blistered from the wooden plough, knees muddy from fields. You don't even have permission to die in. You're a piece of agricultural equipment that breathes and complains too much. The Spartans don't farm because farming is dirty. You do it because you're already filthy. From sunrise to well past sunset, you drag yourself across fields so vast they seem designed to break you. The work doesn't pause for hunger, illness, or injury. You weed with fingers that won't bend properly. You carry baskets of olives until your arms go numb. You push ploughs while barefoot, the wood digging into your ribs as you heave forward like a yoked ox, which, incidentally, eats better than you and gets to lie down when it's done. You don't. You keep going until someone tells you to stop, or until your body decides for you. And when the fields are quiet, you're still not free. Someone always finds a new task. Carry these stones to the river. Haul this timber up that hill. Skin this animal. Clean out that latrine. You become a creature of many miseries, not good at any of them, just available. You're useful precisely because you're expendable. If the job breaks you, they'll send someone else. If it kills you, they'll pretend you never existed. You don't get breaks. You get tasks you don't get paid. You get blamed when something goes wrong. Some days the work feels almost survivable. That's when they add the humiliation. You might be ordered to serve a Spartan soldier directly, not in any noble or ceremonial way, but as a mix of servant and furniture. You kneel so they can tie their sandals without bending. You hold up a tray during their meal like a human table. You're told to clean their armor with rags soaked in your own spit. It's not enough to be obedient. You must also be invisible, reverent, and quiet. But not too quiet, or they'll accuse you of thinking. And that's dangerous. Spartan boys, especially the younger ones, treat you like a toy designed for violence. You're not allowed to resist. If they tell you to bark, you bark. If they tell you to run, you run. And if they decide to trip you mid-run for fun, you're the one who gets kicked for falling badly. You are their entertainment between training drills. They beat you for discipline, which is their word for boredom. You've seen men lose eyes to wooden sticks. You've seen women collapse from overwork and wake up with boots on their ribs. And no one is punished. Not them anyway. The law does not protect you. It acknowledges you the way one might acknowledge the presence of a shovel. You can be assaulted, mutilated, raped, or even killed, and the worst consequence your attacker will face is a slightly delayed lunch. Your suffering isn't a crime. It's a background detail, something that might be mildly inconvenient if you bleed on the wrong floor. When you hear the word justice, you know it isn't for you. You don't even get to plead, you just endure. And still somehow you're expected to be grateful. Grateful that you weren't chosen for the Cryptia this year. Grateful that today's beating was light. Grateful that the soldier whose boots you polished didn't decide to test his knife on your ribs just to see how sharp it was. Spartans speak about you like you're a problem that hasn't been solved yet. A necessary evil. A walking burden. A thing that ought to be replaced by magic if only magic were cheaper. You're livestock with vocal cords, and they resent you for using them. The older helots warn you not to complain, not because they think you'll be heard, but because complaining draws attention. And attention is the one thing worse than starvation. If you stand too tall, speak too clearly, or move too quickly, someone will accuse you of thinking yourself better, of plotting, of imagining a different life. And that will be enough. Enough to warrant a public beating, or a disappearance, or a knife through the belly while you're bent over tying someone else's sandals. They don't need proof, just the mood for an example. So you stop imagining better. You focus on surviving each task, each hour, each humiliating command. You learn to carry heavy loads with your head bowed. You learn how to spit polished leather with your sleeves and hide the blood on your knuckles when no one's looking. You learn to keep your face blank when they joke about you in your presence, calling you animal, slave, filth, because reacting is more dangerous than agreeing. Eventually, you even forget what it felt like to work for yourself, or to rest. You're not a craftsman, not a tradesman, not a citizen. You're a helot, a mule in human form, a living scarecrow with hands like bark and eyes like mud. You work because stopping would be noticed, and being noticed has never done you any favours. There's a particular kind of silence that settles over the helot villages once a year. It's not peaceful. It's the silence of breath held too long, of footsteps slowed to avoid making noise, of eyes kept low, even when no one's around. You can feel it in your bones before anyone says a word. The fields aren't quite as full. The air feels thicker. Children are pulled indoors early. Doors that don't usually close now stay shut with whatever wood or stone can be wedged against them. No one says it aloud, but everyone knows. The Cryptia has begun. On paper, it's a rite of passage, a training exercise for the most promising Spartan youths. They're sent out into the countryside alone, armed only with a knife, some provisions, and orders from the state. The mission? Kill helots. That's it. No justification needed. No formal accusations. Just blood. The logic is that it teaches stealth, toughness, and patriotism. In reality, it's legalized murder, a hunt where the prey is you. You, your neighbors, your siblings, your parents. You are the exercise. You are the proof of their coming manhood. There are no warnings, no safe zones, no rules. You might be out gathering sticks or walking back from a well, or napping in the shade of a crumbling wall. It doesn't matter. If they find you, and they think you're alone, you die. Quietly, quickly, sometimes slowly, if they feel like practicing technique. You've heard the stories. Helots strangled with fishing nets, throats slit while they were half asleep. Bodies found days later in irrigation ditches with coins shoved into their mouths, like some cruel parody of funeral rites. These aren't exaggerations, they're traditions. You can't run. That would be suspicious. You can't hide. That would be rebellious. You can't fight back. That would be suicidal. So you do what helots have always done. You try not to be noticed. You dress in drabber rags than usual. You keep to crowded places when you can, though the Spartans prefer to strike in isolation. You don't talk. You don't move too fast. You avoid eye contact with anyone under 20 who looks like they might be proving something. And still, none of it guarantees anything. Because if they want to kill you, they will. And the law, as such as it exists, will applaud them for it. The Spartan elders call it population control, a method of keeping helots fearful, docile, and numerically manageable. Every year, they claim that too many helots have grown bold, too many are talking out of turn, or standing too straight, or walking too confidently. The Cryptia is the solution, not just to thin the numbers, but to remind the survivors of their place. Your place, beneath them, beneath everything. And of course, it's not just murder, it's message sending. The youths are encouraged to target helots who look strong, who might become trouble later. You've seen friends picked off simply for having broad shoulders or walking with too much certainty. One year, a boy from your village was killed just after turning 15, stabbed through the spine while carrying a sack of barley. No one spoke his name for weeks, not out of disrespect but out of fear that even mourning could be misinterpreted as defiance. The soldiers in training are praised afterward. They're expected to come back with proof. Bloodied blades, notched belts, sometimes fingers. One boy was honoured publicly for racking up 9 kills in a week, most of them unarmed, elderly helots. The crowd clapped. His father cried with pride. You stood among the labourers watching the ceremony, silent, trying not to blink too much or look too interested. You couldn't afford to let your disgust show. You couldn't even afford grief. And yet, somehow, the Cryptia isn't officially counted as war. It doesn't involve armies, it doesn't produce heroes. It isn't commemorated on bronze plaques. It's more like pest control. You're the infestation, and they're doing some seasonal cleaning. No one will ask why a helot boy vanished from his hut. No one will investigate the pile of bloodied rags found in a riverbed. If the Spartans even mention it, it will be to pat themselves on the back for raising such efficient killers. You start to dread anyone with a clean face and new sandals. That usually means they've just joined the program. Their eagerness is more dangerous than a veteran's boredom. The veterans at least learn restraint. The new ones are still trying to earn praise. They want a clean kill, something they can describe later over a fire. You're not a person in their eyes. You're a test, a statistic, a meat dummy that bleeds conveniently. Some helots try to pray their way through it. Others just drink until they can't feel the tension anymore. You've tried both. Neither works. The Cryptia is a season of death, but it's not just about the people who die. It's about the people left behind, flinching at every footstep, listening for every twig snap, wondering if the boy behind the olive tree has a knife and a reason to use it. You don't sleep well during the Cryptia, not because you're scared, but because you're realistic. When it ends, there's no announcement. The boys go home. The blood dries. The names are not spoken. And the helots who remain step back into the fields, heads down, hearts clenched, pretending the last month didn't happen. But you remember. You always do. You remember who vanished. You remember the silence. You remember the feeling of being hunted in your own home. And you remember that next year, it will happen again. It's one thing to be worked like an animal. It's another to be owned like one. Your body is not yours. That was made clear before you were old enough to understand what a body even is. You don't get to decide what it does, where it goes, who touches it, or whether it gets to keep breathing. Those decisions are made for you by people who think of you less as a person and more as a tool. And tools don't have opinions. Tools don't have boundaries. Tools exist to be used. Marriage is not a choice, it's an assignment. One day, a headman or a Spartan official informs you that you are now someone's spouse, usually someone you've barely spoken to, often someone who has also been told the news for the first time. There is no ceremony, no celebration, no garland of flowers or songs of joy, just a matter-of-fact expectation that the two of you will now share a sleeping mat, produce children, and continue labouring without interruption. You might be 14. You might already be pregnant from something else. It doesn't matter. The decision has been made. You are not allowed to say no. Refusing a state-arranged pairing is treated as rebellion, or worse, arrogance. You're not valuable enough to have preferences. If you complain, you'll be punished. If you cry, you'll be mocked. And if you stay silent, as most do, then the world will move on, as if your consent was never required in the first place, which it wasn't. Children come whether you want them or not, and once they do, you quickly learn that they don't belong to you either. Spartan officials or estate managers might borrow your son for errands or haul your daughter off to serve as a domestic servant in the city. Sometimes they come back, sometimes they don't. You aren't told why, you aren't told where, and you certainly aren't asked whether it's all right. It's not kidnapping, it's redistribution. Just more state property being reassigned for optimal use. There are times, more than you'd like to count, when a Spartan man decides he wants something from you that isn't labour. Maybe it's your body. Maybe it's your silence. Maybe it's the way you flinch when he gets close. You're not in a position to say no. You've seen what happens to helots who try. You've seen what's left of them. A glance too long, a protest too loud, and suddenly you're a cautionary tale with no name. A bloodstain in the grass, a ghost in the fields. When they take you, they do not ask. Sometimes it's done with the lazy confidence of someone who knows the law protects them. Sometimes it's done with cold calculation, a show of dominance, a message to your partner, your family, your village. A warning, stay in line, or this will happen again. Not that it needs to be said, everyone already knows. There is no justice for helots, no recourse, no trial. If you survive, you're expected to keep working. If you don't, the earth will take you, and no one will ask why. The worst part isn't the pain, it's the indifference, the way they don't even look at you afterward, the way the world keeps turning like nothing happened. You still have to report to the fields the next day. Body aching, clothes torn, eyes hollow. The crops still need harvesting. The animals still need feeding. No one pauses the world for a broken helot. You cry in silence. You scream into your blanket when no one's listening. And when someone is listening, you pretend everything's fine. Your body becomes something you try not to notice. It's easier that way. You ignore the bruises. You stop tracking the pain. You pretend the blood is from the fields, not from inside. You dissociate, not because you're weak, but because it's the only way to survive being treated like a sack of meat with hands. You forget what it was like to feel safe in your own skin. You forget what it felt like to be whole. That's the goal. That's the system working exactly as intended. Pregnancy is a gamble. If the child is strong, it might live long enough to become another cog in the machine. If it's weak, it might die, and you'll be blamed for it. Either way, your body doesn't get a say. You go back to work days after giving birth, sometimes the same day. No one gives you time to heal. No one gives you anything. The milk dries up too fast. The baby cries too long. And eventually, the cycle begins again. And if you're lucky, if no one has claimed you, beaten you, or used you up too thoroughly, you might make it to middle age. But even that offers no protection. Your body doesn't become sacred. It becomes inconvenient, slower, more breakable, less interesting. You'll still be worked until your knees give out, your back folds in half, and your breath comes in wheezes. And when you finally collapse in a field or in a corner of a hut, someone might haul you to a ditch or leave you where you fell. Because you were never meant to last. You were meant to serve, to bear, to suffer, and then to disappear. Quietly, efficiently, without complaint. Everyone has thought about it at least once. The idea sneaks into your mind when the sun is too hot, the lash lands too hard, or the grain you worked so hard to grow vanishes into the hands of someone who doesn't even know your name. You look around at the other helots, at your numbers, at the sheer mass of bodies bent in the fields, and you think, just for a moment, what if we stood up? What if we pushed back? What if we stopped being afraid? And then the thought dies strangled by memory, because you've seen what happens when someone acts on it. Helots have rebelled before, more than once. There have been uprisings, assassinations, small coordinated strikes. Whole villages have tried to vanish into the mountains, armed with stolen knives and the kind of hope that only comes from desperation. And every time, it ends the same way. With Sparta burning everything down, with crops razed, elders hanged from tree branches and survivors rounded up like diseased animals. You've walked past villages that no longer exist. You've seen bones poking up through scorched earth. The only markers of a rebellion someone once thought was noble. The numbers don't help you. Yes, the helots outnumber the Spartans, by a lot. Some say 7-1, others say even more. But numbers are only power when they're armed and organised, and you're neither. You've got no weapons beyond farming tools and no training beyond how to stay invisible. The Spartans, on the other hand, have been practicing murder since they could walk. Their entire society revolves around war. Yours revolves around surviving long enough to scrape together the next meal. They start training at 7, learning how to fight, kill, stalk and dominate. You start working at 5, learning how to carry water and avoid beatings. They get mentorship. You get malnutrition. They're encouraged to be cunning. You're punished for speaking out of turn. The difference isn't just physical, it's psychological. They're conditioned to see you as subhuman. You're conditioned to see them as gods with whips and spears. That's not a fair fight. That's a butcher shop. Even when someone manages a successful strike, maybe a knife between the ribs of a drunk overseer, maybe a roof set ablaze under cover of night, the victory is short. The backlash comes fast and without limit. It's never just the person responsible who suffers. It's their family, their neighbours. Sometimes entire regions are declared suspect. Fields are torched, food stores are confiscated, people disappear. The message is always the same. For every drop of Spartan blood, a flood of Helot blood will follow. The cruelty isn't just punishment, it's theatre. The Spartans want you to see what happens. They make examples out of rebels because it reinforces the natural order. Your suffering becomes part of the lesson. They don't just want obedience, they want despair. Hope is dangerous. It leads to ideas and ideas lead to action. So they don't just kill the leaders, they laugh while doing it. They mock the attempt, call it pathetic, tell stories about it later, around the fire. Your rebellion becomes the punchline to a joke about how even the slaves think they matter sometimes. You've heard these stories. Everyone has. There's one about a helot who tried to poison a Spartan commander and ended up tied to a post with honey smeared across his skin. The ants did the rest. Another about a village that planned an escape, only for one of their own, tortured and broken, to reveal the plan. The entire village was flayed alive, then dumped into a quarry. No one remembers their names. Just the warning. Don't be like them. And maybe once you thought you would be braver than that you'd rather die on your feet than live on your knees. But time has a way of wearing that down. Hunger chips at it. Grief dulls it. Watching people you care about suffer because you dared to speak out grinds it into dust. You stop dreaming about justice. You start dreaming about quiet, about making it through the day without incident, about avoiding the next Cryptia. And then you wake up and keep your head down. Because even if you manage to stab a Spartan, even if you run, even if you hide, you won't change anything. You won't spark a revolution. You won't liberate anyone. At best, you'll buy yourself a few hours before they catch you. At worst, you'll doom everyone you've ever known. You become a cautionary tale, a warning for the rest of us, or, if you're really unlucky, a source of amusement, your death repeated in a dozen retellings by boys in armour laughing around a fire, so you don't rebel, not because you're a coward, but because you've done the math. And you know how this ends. There's a specific kind of performance the Spartans enjoy, one that doesn't involve music, applause, or any real skill. It involves you. More specifically, it involves you pretending not to be in pain while they strip you of whatever scraps of dignity you might have managed to hold on to. It's not enough for them to own your labour, your body, and your future. They want to own your image too. They want to mould you into a warning, a living, breathing punchline with no say in the matter. You're not just a helot. You're a cautionary tale weaponized for the moral instruction of Spartan children. The goal is simple, to show them what weakness looks like, what cowardice, failure, and filth look like, what happens when you aren't born into glory. So they call you forward, often without notice, and hand you a skin of wine. Not a cup, a skin. It's strong bitter stuff, made from the leftovers of better vintages, and just enough rot to twist your stomach. You're told to drink, all of it, right now. You don't get to say no. Refusal would be disrespectful, and disrespect, as you've learned time and time again, is a punishable offence, even when the command itself is humiliating. So you drink. You gulp it down, coughing and retching, as the soldiers and their families watch. They laugh when you gag. They cheer when your eyes water. They nudge their children and say, "See? This is what becomes of the weak." You finish the wine, or most of it, and then the real performance begins. They make you dance. Not well, not gracefully. They don't want beauty. They want spectacle. You're expected to stumble, to sway, to flail your arms like an idiot. You're expected to slur nonsense, to mimic the speech of the educated while sounding like a fool. Sometimes they'll shout instructions mid-performance, bark like a dog, pretend to be a king, crawl in the dirt and beg for food. You comply because you've seen what happens when someone breaks character. The performance ends early, and not for your benefit. When you fall, they laugh harder. When you vomit, they applaud. It's not just entertainment, it's reassurance. It reminds them of their superiority. Their children look on, wide-eyed, taking mental notes. This is what not to become. This is the bottom rung. This is what happens when you aren't Spartan. The lesson is clear, and the medium is you. Drunk, degraded, and entirely replaceable. And when it's over, there's no thank you, no dismissal, no return to anonymity. That would suggest you had a role in the process, some agency in your own disgrace. Instead, they beat you. Not for disobedience, but for being disgraceful. For playing your part too well. For confirming what they already believe. That you're weak, foolish, and corrupt by nature. The blows land hard, sometimes with fists, sometimes with the flat of a sword. Sometimes they don't stop until you're unconscious or crawling away on your elbows. Afterward, if you can still stand, you go back to work. If not, you lie where they leave you until someone drags you out of the way. The wine wears off eventually, but the shame lingers. It sticks to your skin like sweat, seeps into your dreams. You try not to think about how you looked, how you sounded, how the children laughed when you cried out for help and no one stepped in. You tell yourself it was just another task like hauling water or picking olives. But it wasn't. It was something else. Something deeper. You see it in the faces of other helots who've been made to perform, a dullness behind the eyes, a silence that lasts longer than it should. Some never quite come back from it. They work slower, speak less, flinch at the sound of laughter. You can't blame them. There's only so much you can take before the part of you that believes you're still human begins to erode. And once that part is gone, what's left? A body that moves when told, a face that doesn't cry anymore, a soul that's forgotten how to resist. The Spartans call it a public service, a form of education. They believe they're doing something noble, protecting their children from moral decay by parading it around on two legs. They don't see the contradiction. They don't notice that the cruelty they inflict in the name of discipline is the rot they claim to be guarding against. Or maybe they do. Maybe that's the point. Maybe they know that the best way to keep a system like this running is to grind people down until they participate in their own humiliation without protest. And you do protest at first, inwardly, quietly, a flicker of rage, a stab of shame, but it fades, because protest doesn't change anything. It doesn't stop the next performance. It doesn't unteach the Spartan children what they've learned. It doesn't scrub the memory from your skin. You learn to swallow it, to wear the mask, to hope that next time they pick someone else. Because in Sparta, even your disgrace belongs to them. You're told the gods watch everything, that they hear every prayer, weigh every offering, and dispense justice from Olympus with divine balance. But if that's true, then they must be watching you very selectively, or perhaps not at all. Because from where you stand, elbow deep in ash and entrails, it doesn't feel like justice. It feels like a bad joke told over and over again, one where the punchline is always your name, and the gods are the ones laughing. Sparta is deeply religious, not in the gentle candlelit way of distant temples or whispered blessings. Their religion is rigid, loud, and unmistakably sharp-edged. Sacrifices, ceremonies, omens, festivals, all constant, all grand. There are shrines everywhere, built with stone hauled in by helots, adorned with gold carried in by helots, cleaned and maintained by helots. You see the gods daily. Their statues tower over you while you scrub the steps. Their names are etched into walls you helped construct. Their feasts are prepared in kitchens where you're not allowed to eat. But none of it is for you. You are not invited to pray, not in the public way at least. You are not allowed to present offerings unless they were handed to you by someone in armour. You don't get blessings. You don't get rights. When a Spartan prays, it's with the confidence of someone who assumes they'll be heard. When you pray, it's while hoping no one notices you're doing it. Because if they do, they'll laugh. Or worse, they'll ask who you think you're praying to, as if the gods would waste their time on you. Your role in religion is the same as your role in everything else, labour. You clean the altars before the sacrifices, sweep the temple floors after the blood dries, haul the animals in, and the carcasses out. You see more of the rituals than most Spartan citizens, but only from behind the scenes, with a broom in your hand and your head bowed. You've carried sacred relics in processions, barefoot and silent, while watching others sing hymns you weren't taught. You've seen gods lifted high while you were covered in their followers' refuse. The sacrifices are plentiful. Cows, goats, sheep, all slaughtered with ceremony and purpose. The choicest cuts are offered to the gods. The second best go to the priests. The scraps go to the citizens. You, if you're lucky, might get to pick through the bones once the ceremony ends. You gnaw at cartilage while the faithful talk about divine favour and communal strength. You taste the blood of worship, but never the warmth of belief. It's all muscle and gristle and cold fat by the time it reaches your hands. Sometimes, in moments you don't talk about, you wonder if the gods hate you. Not in the dramatic, vengeful way, just in the quiet, disinterested way of someone who has better things to do. You've watched a Spartan who beat you unconscious go on to win a chariot race, and receive a wreath from a priest. You've seen plague sweep through your village and leave the elite untouched. You've buried children and begged the gods to give them peace, only to hear priests thank the same gods for a good harvest. It's hard not to notice the pattern. You don't even get funeral rites. When you die, there is no temple bell, no processional hymn. There is barely a hole in the ground. Your family, if they're allowed, will wrap your body in whatever cloth is available and bury you quietly, hoping the overseer doesn't demand you finish your shift first. The Spartans say that proper funerals are essential for reaching the afterlife, which means you, like so many helots before you, will likely spend eternity wandering, unwelcome even among the dead. The priests do not care. Why would they? Their wine is sweet, their robes unstained, their words taken as truth. You've seen them walk past the hungry, the wounded, the grieving, without pause. You've heard them bless Spartan children while stepping over the corpse of a helot girl who collapsed from heat stroke. To them, you're not a soul. You're a backdrop, a set piece in their grand moral stage play. Your suffering is just part of the atmosphere, unpleasant, but useful. It gives their piety contrast, and yet somehow you still find yourself whispering to the gods at night. Not the grand ones with golden statues and 10-syllable names, the older ones, the forgotten ones, the ones who might still remember what dirt tastes like. You ask them not for justice, that word has no meaning anymore, but for small things, a painless death, a warm breeze, that your child, if taken, will at least be spared the worst. You don't expect answers, but you whisper anyway. Because silence, at least, feels slightly less cruel when it's shared. If the gods are watching, they have made their stance clear. Sparta gleams with their favour. Their temples stand tall. Their warriors claim to be divine instruments. And you? You mop the floor after the sacrifice, listening to hymns that were never meant for your ears. There are two ways to die in Sparta. One is as a Spartan, the other is as you. The difference isn't just in how it ends, but in how the ending is treated. When a Spartan dies, it's a production, a solemn ritual of incense, chanting, processions, and grief so well practiced, it might as well be theatre. They're carried through the streets, on polished stretchers, faces wrapped in clean linen, weapons placed beside them, as if they'll need them in the afterlife. People cry, people remember. Their names are recorded, spoken aloud, passed down. When a helot dies, there is no procession, no incense, no linen, no name. If someone is there to witness it, they might tug the body off the road so others don't trip over it. If no one is watching, you'll rot where you fell. In a field, in a ditch, in the shadow of a granary, you weren't allowed to enter. You are not mourned, you are not honoured, you are not mentioned again unless someone needs an example of what happens when you don't work hard enough. Sometimes your family tries to bury you, quietly in the dark, digging shallow graves with their hands. They can't afford tools, and even if they could, the noise might draw attention. The law doesn't forbid helots from burying their dead, but it doesn't protect the act either. If a Spartan catches them in the act, they might be beaten, or worse, accused of conspiracy. Because digging is suspicious, graves suggest sentiment, and sentiment is dangerous in people who are supposed to be forgettable. Even when you're buried, it isn't deep. The ground is hard and your family's exhausted. They do what they can. A few feet of earth, a covering of stones, maybe a scrap of cloth tied to a stick if they're feeling brave. There are no prayers, not allowed anyway. Maybe a whispered word to a god who stopped listening centuries ago. Maybe just a breath held too long, a final gesture of recognition, before vanishing into the anonymity that your life never managed to escape. Grief is a luxury you're not afforded. The fields still need to be worked, the overseers still expect reports. The harvest doesn't pause for heartbreak. So when someone dies, someone you cared for, someone you lived beside, someone you bled next to in the fields, you go back to work the next day. There is no time to cry, and if you do cry, You do it in silence, head down, back bent, praying that your grief doesn't look too much like defiance. Even your name won't last. It wasn't recorded when you were born, and it won't be remembered when you die. Maybe a handful of people will say it under their breath, in private moments, as a way of resisting the erasure, but they'll stop eventually, because saying your name becomes harder with time, and more dangerous. After a while, it just fades, replaced by the tasks you left unfinished. The corner of the field you used to weed, the gap you left in the sleeping mat. Spartans get tombs, not all of them, but enough. They get markers, stones etched with words, symbols of lineage and valour. Their families can return to those places. They can point to them and say, "Here lies someone who mattered." You don't get a marker. You don't get a grave anyone's allowed to visit. At most, you might get a glance at the patch of dirt someone thinks you're under. But even that fades quickly, as new tasks and new deaths make remembering you impractical. There are stories, helots who died in ways too public to ignore, ones who collapsed during a feast, or during a task assigned by a particularly cruel overseer. Their deaths become tools, cautionary tales. Don't work like him, he didn't pace himself. Don't talk like her, she asked too many questions. They are not remembered as people, but as warnings. You might become one of those stories. It depends less on what you did and more on who was watching when you fell. And if your body is used for punishment, if you're executed or displayed, or simply left out as a reminder, then your death becomes a message, not a eulogy. Just another way Sparta reminds you, and everyone like you, that you're not a person. You're a consequence, a smudge in the dirt, an example to the others. You lived without rest, you worked without thanks, and when you finally fall, whether from age, illness, a blade, or just sheer exhaustion, there's no reward waiting, no reunion, no heavenly justice, no sacred passing, just decay, just silence, just a quiet absence where you used to be. Because in the eyes of the world that owned you, your story ended the moment you stopped being useful, and your memory ended before it even began. When Sparta goes to war, the drums sound, the armour gleams, and the city swells with pride. Songs are sung, offerings are made. Boys too young to shave are told they'll return as men, if they return at all. It's a sacred duty, they say, a test of strength, honour, and loyalty. But none of that applies to you. You're not a soldier, you're not a citizen, you're not even considered part of Sparta's military machine. And yet somehow, you still get dragged along. You don't march in the front lines out of bravery. You do it because someone has to carry the supplies, because someone has to cook the meals, dig the latrines, sharpen the weapons, and haul the bodies when it's over. Helots aren't trained to fight. You're trained to obey. You're a beast of burden, a pack mule with hands, and when Sparta goes to war, they bring their tools. You're not a comrade. You're cargo that happens to scream when stabbed. Sometimes they give you a spear, not a good one, not a real one. A crooked staff with a rusted tip, meant more for show than use. They call it arming you, but it's more like theatre, a prop for a body they already expect to lose. You're not part of the phalanx, that tight, disciplined line of shields and spears that makes Sparta so feared. You're shoved out ahead of it, into the brush, into the mud, into the jaws of whatever ambush is waiting. You are bait, and you know it. Your orders are clear. Advance until you die, or until the real soldiers feel confident enough to follow. If you break rank, you'll be cut down by the men behind you. If you survive longer than expected, someone might question your loyalty. You've seen helots punished for fighting too well, accused of arrogance, of trying to earn glory they weren't entitled to. One man returned from a skirmish, with a Spartan sword taken from an enemy corpse. He was executed that night, not for theft, for presumption. There is no winning for you. If you die, you die. If you survive, you're a liability. If you show courage, it's called insolence. If you run, it's called treason. You don't get statues. You don't get stories. At best, You're remembered as that helot who didn't completely embarrass himself before getting disemboweled. At worst, you're forgotten the second your blood hits the ground. The only medals you'll ever see are the ones you polish for someone else. The conditions are worse than the battlefield itself. You sleep in mud, if you sleep at all. You march barefoot, carrying packs heavier than your own body weight. You're expected to serve hot meals on time while arrows whistle past your ears. And when there's not enough food to go around, which there never is, you're the first to go hungry. A Spartan warrior must be kept strong after all. You can die a little slower, or faster, they don't care. In winter campaigns, your fingers blacken from frostbite while you light fires for men wrapped in fur-lined cloaks. In summer, your skin peels off in sheets while you carry water to men who will pour it over their heads and then spit on you for moving too slowly. Disease spreads fast in camp, and when it does, helots are the first blamed, the first infected, and the last treated. You die of infected blisters while they pray to Apollo for victory. And still, when the enemy charges, you're shoved forward. No helmet, no shield, no chance. You're not expected to hold the line. You're expected to distract the enemy for just long enough that the Spartans can organise themselves. Your death is part of the plan, not an unfortunate possibility, but an intentional step in the strategy, a necessary sacrifice. Not because you volunteered, but because no one thought it mattered. When it's over, if it ever is, you don't return home to cheers or embraces. You return to work, assuming you return at all. Your wounds aren't patched with honour. They're wrapped in rags and ignored. You limp back into the fields, weaker than before, and get told to stop complaining. Because you didn't serve Sparta, you served in the vicinity of Sparta. That's not the same thing. You were there, yes, but you weren't really part of it. Just another shadow on the edge of the firelight. And if you die out there, trampled in the charge, gutted in the muck, or coughing blood in the back of a supply tent, no one will bring you back. No one will carry your body with care. You'll be left for the vultures, buried by weather, or dragged to a ditch by whoever's assigned corpse duty that day. No marker, no prayer, no song, just silence and the soft squelch of someone else stepping over you. Because war, like everything else in Sparta, is a privilege, and you don't have those. Every once in a while, Sparta decides to be generous. Not often, just enough to keep the story going that they can be merciful, that their system isn't entirely made of blood and rope. And so, a few helots, just a few, are granted freedom. That's the word they use anyway. It sounds noble, final, and uplifting. A reward for loyalty, a new beginning. But when you look at it up close, it's not freedom, it's paperwork. A title without substance, the illusion of change, held together by the same people who once owned you. You don't get to apply for this freedom. You don't even know it's coming until someone tells you. Maybe you performed some service, accompanied a Spartan on campaign, survived a war, carried a dying officer back to safety. Maybe you were just the right age and in the right place when someone felt like making a gesture. The reasoning is never explained. They simply declare it, like they're setting a dog loose from a chain. Congratulations, you're now a freedman. You may go nowhere and do nothing different, but you can technically claim you're not a slave. You don't become a citizen. That would be unthinkable. Citizenship is sacred, the core of Spartan identity. It's for those who pass through the agogy, who bleed in official battles, who train from boyhood to be living weapons. You did none of those things. You weren't allowed. So you don't vote, you don't hold office, you don't have a say in anything that happens to you. You're not even allowed to speak at public assemblies. You have a name maybe, but it doesn't open any doors. You don't get land. At least, not the kind that matters. The state might assign you a small plot, more a patch of dirt than a farm, usually in the worst soil, far from any real infrastructure. You might be allowed to lease a goat. You can try to grow barley that won't survive the next drought. But you're still surrounded by Spartans, and they don't forget who you were. You don't become a neighbour. You become a tolerated inconvenience. The other helots don't know what to do with you either. You used to be one of them. Now you're not. But also, somehow, you are. You've been yanked out of their misery, set slightly apart, and left there. You no longer share in their exact suffering, but you're not allowed to escape it either. You can't help them. You can't speak for them. If you try, the Spartans will remind you very quickly where your new place really is. They didn't free you so you could make trouble. They freed you so they could point to you and say, "See, we're not all bad." You're still marked, not physically, not with brands or tattoos, but socially, economically, existentially. Everyone knows you were once a helot. You speak like one. You walk like one. You carry the weight of it in your spine. The Spartans see it when they look at you. So do their children. You're never invited to dine with them. You're not allowed to marry into their families. You're not even allowed to forget. Your name might be different now, but your shadow hasn't changed. When disputes happen, and they always do, your word counts for less. You can be arrested, beaten, accused with little or no evidence. You might avoid the lash this time, but only because it would look bad. That's the real currency you hold now, appearance. You're useful, as long as your freedom reflects well on the system. Step out of line, and they'll take it as proof that you weren't ready for it. That no helot ever is. That freedom makes you ungrateful. And so, you work. Still, you tend your pitiful land. You haul water for people who now call you former helot instead of just helot, as if that's progress. You still wake early, still bow your head when a Spartan passes, still jump when called. You might get a slightly better cut of meat, a slightly softer place to sleep, a few moments of being left alone. But the structure hasn't changed, only your label. The chain is a little longer now, but it's still a chain. You're reminded of it constantly. The way they speak to you, the way they watch you, the way you still flinch when someone raises their voice. You're not free. You're branded with a different kind of servitude, the kind that wears a smile, that thanks you for your service, that invites you to be grateful for the crumbs it tosses at your feet. You are no longer a helot, they say, but you are not anything else. You live in a gap between worlds, a narrow space where identity is a threat and survival is still your only victory. You didn't ask for this. You didn't dream of it. You dreamed of real freedom, a life that belonged to you. This isn't that. This is a category on a census, a gesture meant to quiet someone's conscience. You are not owned, perhaps, but you are still controlled. You are still watched, and you are still very, very alone. Because the worst part of being freed is realizing just how far from freedom you still are. Death doesn't arrive all at once for a helot. It's not swift or clean or dramatic. There's no blaze of glory, no final battle, no noble exit. It comes in pieces, a drawn-out unravelling that begins long before your body stops working. You don't die the way Spartans imagine death. You erode, slowly, relentlessly. The damage starts in your joints and works inward, chipping away at whatever version of yourself still manages to stand upright in the morning. Your knees go first, years of crouching in fields, hauling water, and kneeling in submission, grind them down until they click and buckle when you walk. You start waking up with stiffness that doesn't fade, and falling asleep with a pulse that rattles inside your ears like loose grain in a jar. Your hands follow next, thick with calluses, fingers bent at strange angles, the skin too cracked to heal properly. Tasks that once took minutes now take hours. You feel yourself slowing, even as the overseers shout at you to move faster. Your back curves slowly but definitively, pulled into a hunch by decades of burden. You start to look older than you are, though no one knows exactly how old you are, including you. No one recorded your birth, and you stopped counting the years sometime after your second child died. You lose track of time the way you lose track of sleep, gradually, then completely. The seasons blur, the harvests repeat, and the pain becomes your only real measure of change. Your lungs aren't much better. A lifetime of breathing in dust, smoke and mould has filled them with something heavy and wet. You wheeze when you walk. You cough in the cold, a hacking, desperate sound that draws glances from other helots, not out of pity, but calculation. They're wondering how long you have, not because they'll miss you, but because someone will have to pick up your workload when you finally collapse. Life moves on. The barley still needs planting. You lose weight, but not in a way anyone envies. It's not the lean frame of a disciplined body. It's the slow disintegration of muscle, the hollowness of a stomach that no longer growls because hunger has become so constant it no longer registers as a complaint. Your cheeks sink. Your skin takes on the colour of dry clay. You don't just look like death. You begin to feel translucent, as if the world is forgetting you, even as you stand in it. The aches become routine. Your hips grind when you move. Your feet swell until your sandals no longer fit. You stop noticing the pain and start noticing its absence. The brief moments where something doesn't hurt as much as it used to. That's your version of a blessing now. Not comfort, just less agony. You learn to ration your energy the way you used to ration food. You plan your steps like a military campaign. Every errand becomes a trial. There's no help coming, no doctor, no healer, no priest to lay hands on your brow and murmur soothing things. If you're lucky, another helot might share a salve or a trick they learned from an older cousin. A poultice of crushed herbs, a piece of cloth soaked in vinegar and wrapped around a swollen joint. Most of it doesn't work, but it's something to do. Something that feels like care, even if it's just distraction. Eventually, the work becomes impossible. You can't lift what you used to. You forget steps in tasks you've done 1,000 times. You drop tools and can't pick them up again. The younger helots whisper about you. Not cruelly, just practically. You've become a liability. You're still expected to contribute, but your body won't obey the same way anymore. And when it doesn't, someone notices. And when they notice, you get punished. Not because you're lazy, just because you're no longer useful. You become invisible before you disappear. People stop calling your name. Overseers skip past you when shouting orders, unless it's to remind you that you're in the way. You spend more time sitting than working, though sitting hurts too. You start to sleep during the day because your nights are filled with coughing and dreams that leave you too tired to face the dawn. You don't look in reflective water anymore. There's no point. You don't recognise the face staring back, and neither does anyone else. And then one day, you just stop. Stop walking. Stop standing. Stop being able to lift your own weight out of the straw where you lay. Your body is done, not broken all at once, just worn down to the threads. You lie still for a long time, waiting for someone to notice or to care. But no one comes. The fields are busy. There's always more work, more mouths, more helots who can still move. You close your eyes not out of peace, just exhaustion. And whether your breath slows to stillness in the night or you vanish quietly from the edge of the fields, a day or two later, it doesn't change anything. The barley still grows. The tools still clatter. The world moves forward exactly as it did before. Because you were never built to be remembered, just used, and once used up, discarded without pause. When people talk about Sparta, they speak in reverent tones. They speak of strength, of discipline, of a warrior culture unmatched in all of history. They marvel at the endurance of the phalanx, the simplicity of the Spartan code, the way boys were turned into soldiers through grit and fire. They don't talk about you. You're not part of the legend. You're just what the legend stood on, a foundation of backs bent so low that no one thought to look down. Sparta's made of muscle, but the muscle was bought with your starvation. They trained while you worked. They honed their bodies while yours wasted away in the fields. Every moment, a a Spartan boy spent drilling with a spear was made possible by your labour. While they shouted oaths and brandished bronze, you were planting barley, hauling water, slaughtering livestock. Their bodies hardened while yours broke. Their legend grew while you disappeared into the background. Even their leisure came at your expense. The Spartan elite didn't cook, clean, or even raise their own children. You did that for them. You made their beds, carried their firewood, fetched their wine. You stood silently in the corners of their homes while they spoke of glory and virtue, careful not to breathe too loudly. You washed their bloodied tunics after battle. You stitched their cloaks while your own rags fell to pieces. Every ounce of comfort they claimed was squeezed from someone like you. The culture they boast about, the austere values, the military excellence, the communal discipline, was only possible because they never had to feed themselves. You freed them from the drudgery of survival. That's the real reason they could be so pure, so focused, so uncorrupted by wealth or decadence. They had you to do all the dirty work. They didn't need gold because they already had something better, a permanent underclass they could squeeze dry. Even their morality was built on your silence. They called themselves just, orderly, noble. They spoke of law and balance, but you weren't part of that order. The rules that protected them didn't apply to you. You were a variable to be controlled, not a citizen to be considered. And when they needed to explain their system, when outsiders questioned how a society of warriors could function without collapsing, they pointed to you, quietly, as if that answered everything. You were the economic engine, not a cog, the whole thing. You kept the grain growing, the livestock fed, the roads clear, the tools repaired, the temples maintained. And in return, you were given less than nothing. You weren't just unpaid, you were degraded, dehumanized, erased. Your contribution was so essential that they built rituals around making sure you didn't realize it. They beat you to remind you. They humiliated you to distract you. They killed you to make space for the next round of replacements. Their legends were carved in marble, but your stories written in the soil, in the cracks of the roads you built, in the worn handles of the ploughs you dragged through rocky fields, in the stained stones of the temples you cleaned but never entered. You won't be remembered in song. Your name won't echo in the halls of learning, but your blood still marks the places where Sparta grew proud. The songs they sing about Thermopylae don't mention who planted the crops while the warriors marched off to die. The tales of valour at Plataea don't include who dug the graves afterward. When they glorify the Spartan way, they talk about sacrifice, discipline, brotherhood, but they never talk about who paid for all of it, who made that lifestyle possible. Because the truth tarnishes the myth. And myths, unlike helots, are carefully protected. You never asked for glory. You just wanted to live, to eat, to hold your children without fear, to speak without being punished. But the system didn't care what you wanted. It only cared what it could take. And it took everything. Your time, your body, your family, your name, even your death was claimed as a necessity, a cost of doing business in the world's most admired slave state. And now, centuries later, when people look back and call Sparta noble, efficient, heroic, they're not thinking of you. They're thinking of the warriors you carried on your back, the ones who kicked you aside on their way to immortality, the ones who built their glory on a mountain of forgotten corpses. Your corpse, most likely, or someone just like you. There are no monuments for helots, no festivals, no holidays, no footnotes in history books that do more than mention you as a problem to be managed. But you were real. You were the heartbeat of the system, even as it crushed you under its heel. You kept Sparta alive, and in return, it erased you. Not out of hatred, out of design. Because every empire needs a foundation, and yours was made of bone. You were never supposed to be remembered. That was part of the plan, not a flaw in the system, a feature. Sparta didn't just own your labour, it owned your silence, it owned your erasure. From the moment you were born, Every piece of your life was built to disappear without resistance. No songs, no stories, no names etched in stone. Just fading footprints in dirt that would be tilled over by the next generation of helots, too hungry to ask what came before them. History doesn't talk about you, not really. When it does, it speaks around you. Vague references to agricultural labour, to state-owned workers, to supporting infrastructure. Words that try very hard not to say what you actually were: human, living, hurting, dying in fields so someone else could polish a spear and pretend he was chosen by the gods. You are not the focus. You're the shadow cast by someone else's spotlight. A footnote beneath a paragraph about glory. The Spartans didn't want monuments for you. They wanted you to vanish without ripple, to die quietly and unremarkably, so they could go on pretending that greatness happens in a vacuum. That power isn't built on the backs of people like you. That excellence emerges pure and untainted by the grime of human suffering. You are inconvenient, a reminder that even the strongest need someone else to clean their boots, carry their armour, feed their children, and build their legacy from the mud upward. And yet you were real, you existed. Not as an idea, not as a statistic, but as a breathing, aching, enduring presence. You had a body, a voice, a mind that remembered things. It wasn't supposed to. Warmth, maybe once, laughter maybe, briefly. You had moments, small ones, a stolen bite of fruit, a child's hand gripping yours before being taken away, a night where the stars felt close enough to touch, and no one shouted your name. That was you. Not glorious, but real. You bled. Not metaphorically, not poetically. You bled from cracked hands, from cuts that never healed right, from punishments that made your ribs hum with bruised music. Your body broke itself to keep other bodies standing taller, and no one thanked you. No one paused. But that blood mattered, even if the world pretended it didn't. It soaked into the fields, into the foundations of temples, into the grain that Spartans chewed without knowing the name of the person who died harvesting it. You mattered, not to them, never to them, but to the people who whispered your name when no one else was listening, to the child you held until they could walk on their own, to the neighbour who handed you half a loaf of bread and said nothing, to the fellow helot who met your gaze across a courtyard and didn't look away. Your existence rippled in small defiant ways, not enough to be remembered broadly, but enough to be real and human and here. And now someone knows. Not because you were famous, not because you won a battle or founded a city, but because someone bothered to look beneath the myth, to ask who carried the weight while others held the sword, to wonder what happened to the voices that weren't allowed to speak. This story is not carved in marble. It won't be taught in elite academies, but it has been told, quietly, carefully, not to honour you exactly, but to make sure no one mistakes your suffering for something worth envying. Because people forget. They see Sparta's stone ruins and call them noble. They see the discipline and call it admirable. They hear the word helot and think it means nothing. That's what the system wanted. That's what it trained them to believe. But if someone hears your story now, really hears it, maybe they'll pause the next time they're tempted to romanticize the past. Maybe they'll look beyond the marble and ask where the blood came from. You weren't meant to inspire. You were meant to warn. Your life is not a blueprint, it's a condemnation, a slow, grinding truth hidden beneath the armour of a society that called itself virtuous while feeding on your body. And now, in the smallest way, that truth has been said aloud. Not shouted, just spoken, softly, like a whisper passed down through centuries of silence. No one sang songs for you, but someone listened. That brings us to the end of tonight's story. Not a triumph, but an erasure so complete it nearly succeeded. If you're still here, still listening, thank you for walking through a world where dignity was rationed and remembrance was forbidden. The helots were never meant to have a voice, and yet, for a little while, we gave one shape. If you'd like early access to more of these forgotten lives, the buried, the beaten, the ones history left behind, plus other perks like ad-free audio of the episodes, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. You can also like, subscribe, or leave a comment about which quiet horror you'd like unearthed next. And if you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps others find these stories. Sleep well, and remember what they wanted you to forget.